You are looking at a glass jar on a shelf in a cellar dug beneath a farmhouse in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. It has no label, no barcode, no expiration date stamped on the lid. The woman who packed it is gone. She died in 1941, the same year her youngest daughter was born, and the same year a jar of beans packed the previous autumn kept her family from going hungry through a Nebraska winter, when the supply trucks stopped running and the roads froze solid for 6 weeks. Her daughter is now 83 years old. She still has the jar, not a replica, not a memento. The original jar, still sealed, still intact, still holding the same preserved food her mother put inside it 80 years ago. When I asked her if it was still edible, she looked at me the way old women look at people who ask questions with obvious answers. She said, "We opened one just like it in 1987, still good." That is what this video is about. Not survival food, not emergency kits with 30-day shelf lives and calorie counts printed on Mylar packets. Not the $700 freeze-dried meal systems, advertised to people who are scared and don't know what else to buy. This is about a $3 glass jar, a technique that is older than the United States of America, and the specific year a corporation buried it so deep that your grandchildren will still be paying grocery bills for knowledge that should have been free. That year is 1963. Before this video is over, I'm going to show you exactly what was buried, exactly who buried it, and exactly how the same method that kept pioneer families fed through the worst winters, the worst droughts, and the worst economic collapses in American history works for any home you live in right now, whether you have a backyard or a studio apartment, whether you have never canned a single thing in your life, whether the last time you thought about food storage was never. Because this is not complicated. It was made to seem complicated on purpose, and there is a difference. Stay with me. Here is a number that should make you stop and think. The average American family spends $412 per month on groceries. That is nearly $5,000 a year. Over a decade, that is $50,000 spent buying food that lasts 3 days, 4 days, maybe a week before it goes soft in the crisper drawer and gets thrown away. That the average American household throws away approximately 30 to 40% of the food it purchases. 30 to 40%. On a $5,000 annual grocery bill, that is $1,500 to $2,000 per year dropping directly into a garbage can. Nobody talks about this the way they should, because the people who profit from that 30 to 40% do not want you thinking about it clearly. Now let me give you the other number. In the winter of 1932, at the absolute bottom of the Great Depression, a family of 6 in rural Kansas lived entirely off their own preserved food stores from October through March. 20 weeks, 6 people, every meal. Their total cost for the preserved food they ate during those 20 weeks, not including what they grew themselves, was $11.40. I want you to sit with that. Not $11 a day. $11.40 for the entire winter. For 6 people. They were not special. They were not wealthy. They did not have equipment that would look foreign to you. They had glass jars, a wood-burning stove, salt, and a knowledge base that had been passed down through their family since the early 1800s. That knowledge is still completely functional today, and it was almost systematically erased from American life in a single decade. Let me take you back to the beginning of this. Not 1963. Further, 1858. That is the year John Mason filed a patent for a reusable threaded glass jar with a zinc screw-top lid. He was a tinsmith from New York, and he was trying to solve a problem that every American family with any kind of garden or farm faced every single year. The harvest comes all at once, and then it is gone. You grow 50 pounds of tomatoes in August. You eat what you can fresh. The rest rots before November. Mason's jar changed that equation permanently. For the first time in American history, an ordinary family could preserve a summer harvest and eat from it through the following spring. Not in the partial, luck-dependent way that salting and drying and root cellaring had always allowed, but in a reliable, repeatable, scalable way that worked for almost any food you could grow or buy. The timing was not an accident. The Civil War began 3 years after Mason's patent. The Union Army required preserved food at a scale no existing system could support. Mason jars became part of the industrial supply chain that fed the northern states through the war. After the war, they came home with the soldiers. By 1880, the mason jar was in every farmhouse kitchen from Maine to Missouri. By 1900, the Ball Corporation had acquired and expanded the design, and the glass jar had become the single most important food preservation technology in American domestic life. Not canned goods from a factory, not refrigeration, which was still a commercial luxury for most families. The glass jar filled and sealed at home, stored in the cellar. For 70 years, this was the backbone of American food security. Then something changed, not slowly, not gradually, with remarkable speed and remarkable precision. The year is 1945. The war is over. American manufacturing, which had been retooled for military production, is now pivoting to consumer goods at a scale the country had never seen. Factories that made tin cans for K-rations are now making tin cans for Campbell's soup. Infrastructure built to supply an army of 12 million men is now being redirected toward grocery stores. The commercial canning industry, which had existed since the 1850s, but had always been a supplement to home preservation, not a replacement for it, now has something it never had before: scale, advertising budgets, and government relationships. Here is what most people do not know. The USDA Extension Service, which had spent decades publishing and distributing home canning guides to rural American families, quietly began shifting its messaging in the late 1940s. The number of new home canning publications dropped. The number of publications promoting commercially canned products increased. This was not a coincidence. In 1947, a coalition of commercial food manufacturers lobbied the USDA to reframe home canning as a public health risk. Not because home canning had become more dangerous, it had not. The rates of foodborne illness from home-canned products had been declining for 20 years, but the framing of danger was useful. It made families uncertain. Uncertainty made them rely on the store instead of the cellar. By 1955, the narrative had shifted enough that the first generation of post-war American housewives, raised on television advertising and supermarkets stocked with commercially canned goods, were beginning to see home canning as something their grandmothers did. Quaint, old-fashioned, a little suspect. And then came 1963, and what happened in 1963 was not subtle. In 1963, the Ball Corporation, the largest manufacturer of home canning jars in the United States, published a revised edition of its Ball Blue Book of Canning and Preserving. This was not unusual. They had been publishing editions of this book since 1909. It was the most widely read home canning manual in American history. Tens of millions of copies distributed over 50 years. What was in the 1963 edition was different. For the first time, the Ball Blue Book recommended pressure canning as the only safe method for preserving low-acid foods such as green beans, corn, carrots, peas, beets, and meat. Up until that point, home canners had used two primary methods: water bath canning, which uses boiling water to process high-acid foods like tomatoes, fruits, and pickles, and open kettle canning, sometimes called cold pack canning or open pack canning, a method that pioneer families had used for generations, in which the hot food is packed into hot jars, the lids are sealed, and the jars cool without further processing. Open kettle canning worked. Pioneer families had done it for 100 years. The family in Kansas in 1932 had done it. The woman whose mother died in 1941, leaving behind jars that were still viable 46 years later, had done it. But in 1963, Ball declared it unsafe, without controlled study, without a meaningful increase in illness cases from the method. They called it not recommended and provided no pathway back. Almost simultaneously, the USDA adopted the same position. The pressure canner, a considerably more expensive piece of equipment than a simple pot of boiling water, became the required tool. The open kettle method, the one that had cost families almost nothing, disappeared from mainstream instruction within a decade. Now, here is the part that matters. Ball had just released a new line of pressure canners. I want you to hold that in your mind. The method that required the expensive piece of equipment was declared the only safe method by the company that manufactured and sold the expensive piece of equipment. And the United States government agreed with them. I want to be precise here, because precision matters. I am not telling you that open kettle canning is the right choice for every food or every circumstance. I am telling you what was buried and why. The science of food preservation is real. Botulism is real. Temperature matters. But the specific framing of danger that erased an entire category of home food preservation knowledge from mainstream American life in a single decade was not primarily about safety, it was about market capture. And the evidence for this is visible in what happened after 1963. Home canning rates in the United States dropped by 41% between 1960 and 1975. Not because the knowledge stopped working, because the knowledge was made to seem dangerous by the people who profited from its disappearance. Supermarket food sales increased by 600% in the same period. The infrastructure that American families had spent 200 years building, the knowledge base, the equipment, the culture of self-sufficiency in food storage, was dismantled inside one generation. And the families who never rebuilt it are the ones paying $412 a month in groceries today. Now let me show you what still works, not as history, as a living system that you can implement this weekend with materials that cost less than a restaurant meal. The core of what pioneer families knew about glass jar preservation rests on three principles: temperature, acidity, and seal integrity. Everything else, every specific technique, every variation across different foods and different climates flows from these three. Temperature kills pathogens. Not all pathogens require the same temperature or the same duration of heat exposure, which is why different foods require different processing methods. This is real and it matters, and I will be specific about which methods apply to which foods. Acidity is a barrier. High-acid environments, foods with a pH below 4.6, create conditions in which most harmful bacteria, including Clostridium botulinum, the organism responsible for botulism, cannot grow. Tomatoes, fruits, pickles, fermented vegetables, all high-acid foods, all safe for water bath canning without a pressure canner. Seal integrity creates the vacuum. A properly sealed jar creates an anaerobic environment inside the container. When the hot food and hot jar cool, the air inside contracts, the lid is drawn down, and a vacuum seal forms. That vacuum is not decorative, it is the preservation mechanism. These three principles have not changed since 1858. They did not change in 1963. They are not going to change. What changed in 1963 was who controlled the instruction. Here is the actual system, the one that works, the one you can use. The most important thing I can tell you before we go further is this. Start with high-acid foods: tomatoes, fruits, jams, jellies, pickles, fermented vegetables. These are the foods your great-grandmother started with. There is a reason for that. They are the most forgiving. They are the most nutritious when preserved. They are among the most expensive fresh foods at the grocery store. And they are the category where the open water bath method is completely appropriate, has always been completely appropriate, and has been appropriate for 200 years. Here is what you need: a large pot, deep enough to hold your jars with 2 inches of water above the lids. You may already own this. If not, you can buy a suitable pot at a thrift store for $3, which is also, not coincidentally, the price of the glass jar this video is named after. Glass jars with 2-piece lids, the flat lid, and the screw band. A standard wide-mouth quart jar at a hardware store or grocery store costs between $1 and $3. These jars, if treated correctly, will last decades. My family has jars in circulation that are over 40 years old. A jar lifter or a pair of kitchen tongs, that is it. There is no other equipment required for water bath canning of high-acid foods. Now let me walk you through what a pioneer family actually did, step by step, in terms you can replicate exactly in a modern kitchen. Step 1. Prepare your jars. Wash your jars and lids in hot soapy water. Rinse thoroughly. Place the jars in your pot of boiling water for 10 minutes to sterilize them. Keep them in the hot water until you are ready to fill them. Hot food goes into hot jars. This is not optional. A cold jar filled with boiling hot food will crack. A hot jar filled with hot food will seal correctly. Step 2. Prepare your food. For tomatoes, which is where I recommend starting because they are the most forgiving and the most broadly useful preserved food, wash your tomatoes and cut out the stem ends. You can blanch them briefly in boiling water, 30 seconds to 1 minute, and slip the skins off easily. This is not required, but it improves the texture. Pack the tomatoes firmly into your hot jars. Leave ½ inch of headspace, meaning ½ inch of empty space between the food and the rim of the jar. Add 1 tablespoon of bottled lemon juice per quart jar or 1/4 teaspoon of citric acid. This step adjusts the acidity to ensure it falls within the safe range. Do not skip this. Run a clean knife or a thin spatula around the inside of the jar to release any air bubbles. Wipe the rim of the jar with a clean, damp cloth. Any food residue on the rim will prevent a proper seal. Place the flat lid on the jar, then screw the band on fingertip tight. Not wrench tight, fingertip tight. The band needs to be secure, but not so tight that air cannot escape during processing. Step 3. Process. Lower the filled jars into your pot of boiling water using your jar lifter. The water needs to cover the lids by at least 1 to 2 inches. Place the lid on the pot. Return to a full rolling boil. Then process for 45 minutes for quart jars, 35 minutes for pints. Remove from heat. Lift the jars straight up. Do not tilt them. Place on a towel on your counter with 1 to 2 inches of space between jars. Do not touch them for 12 hours. Step 4. Check your seal. After 12 hours, press the center of each lid. If it does not flex up and down, the jar is sealed. If it flexes, it did not seal properly, and that jar needs to go in the refrigerator and be eaten within a week. A sealed jar of tomatoes stored in a cool, dark location is shelf-stable for a minimum of 12 to 18 months. Pioneer families regularly stored theirs for 2 to 3 years, without loss of safety or significant loss of quality. Now let me show you what this actually means for a family today. In August, you can buy a 25-pound box of Roma tomatoes at a farm stand, a farmer's market, or directly from a farm for $10 to $15. This is the peak of harvest season. These are the same tomatoes that will cost you $4 a pound in February. 25 pounds of tomatoes will yield approximately 15 to 20 quart jars of canned tomatoes, depending on how you pack them. At $4 per pound in February, those same 25 pounds of tomatoes have a retail value of $100. The 25-pound box costs you $15 at harvest. 15 jars of preserved tomatoes, using methods that have not changed since your great-great-grandmother's kitchen, bought at peak season and stored correctly, represent an $85 savings on a single category of food. And that is only tomatoes, beans, peppers, corn, peaches, pears, apples, strawberry jam, pickled cucumbers. These are the foods your pioneer ancestors preserved every single autumn, in quantities that carried their families through an entire winter, not as a hobby, not as a craft project, as the primary mechanism of household food security. The Ball Blue Book of 1909 listed 27 standard preservation recipes for a family of 4 to put up before the first frost. If you followed those 27 recipes at today's farm stand prices for bulk produce and compared the result to grocery store prices, for the same quantity of food in winter, you would save between $800 and $1,200 per year. every year, with a $3 glass jar. Let me tell you about something else that disappeared after 1963, the root cellar. Not the structure itself. You can still build a root cellar. The knowledge of what goes into it and why, that is what disappeared. A root cellar is not just a hole in the ground. It is a passive temperature and humidity management system built on the same physics as the Amish spring houses and the earth tubes I have discussed on this channel before. Soil temperature 6 feet below the surface locks in at between 45 and 55 degrees Fahrenheit in most of North America, and stays there regardless of what the air above is doing. Your great-grandmother's cellar was not cold because she dug it in the shade. It was cold because she understood that the earth itself maintains temperature, and that a properly constructed underground space can hold root vegetables, preserved jars, and fermented foods in stable conditions for months without a single watt of electricity. Apples stored in a root cellar keep from October through March. Carrots packed in damp sand keep for 4 to 5 months. Potatoes keep for 6 months or more if cured correctly. Beets, turnips, parsnips, cabbage, all of them keep in conditions that cost nothing to maintain because the earth provides the temperature for free. The root cellar did not disappear because refrigerators are better. Refrigerators are better for some things and worse for others. Apples stored in a refrigerator lose their flavor and texture in 6 to 8 weeks. Apples stored in a root cellar at the right temperature and humidity are edible in March and sometimes April. The root cellar disappeared because it required no ongoing expenditure, no electricity, no appliance purchase, no service contract, no replacement parts. It was replaced by the chest freezer, which uses 200 to 400 kilowatt hours of electricity per year and requires replacement every 12 to 15 years, and by the modern refrigerator, which uses between 300 and 800 kilowatt hours per year, lasts 15 to 20 years if maintained, and keeps your produce for a fraction of the time a root cellar keeps it. The technologies are not equivalent. They serve different functions, but the marketing of one erased the knowledge of the other. I want to tell you about a woman named Lillian in rural Ohio. She is 61 years old. She grew up watching her mother and grandmother can every summer, but she stopped in her 30s when her life got busy and the grocery store seemed like the simpler choice. She tells me she spent roughly $6,000 a year on groceries for herself and her 2 teenagers. 3 years ago, she started again. She started with tomatoes, 1 bushel, 25 pounds, processed in an afternoon, 17-quart jars. The following February, when she reached for a jar of those tomatoes to make soup, she told me it felt like finding money she had forgotten she saved. She had paid roughly 14 cents per serving for tomatoes that would have cost her $1.40 per serving at the grocery store. That first year, she put up tomatoes and peaches. The second year, she added green beans, using a pressure canner for those because she understood the distinction, and pickles, and apple butter, and dried beans, and corn. She built a simple root cellar in her basement using insulated panels and a small dedicated thermometer to monitor temperature. Her annual grocery bill last year was $2,200. She and her 2 teenagers ate the same food they always ate. Nothing was missing. Nothing was scarce. She saved $3,800 in 1 year with a $3 glass jar and knowledge that her grandmother tried to pass down to her 30 years ago. I want to be direct with you about something before I close. The food preservation knowledge I am describing in this video is not magic. It is not alternative medicine. It is not fringe survivalism. It is chemistry. It is microbiology. It is the application of physical laws that govern temperature, acidity, and bacterial growth. These laws have not changed. They did not change in 1963 when the Ball Corporation decided that pressure canners were the only acceptable path for low-acid foods. They will not change tomorrow. What changed in 1963 was control of the instruction. And control of the instruction changed what American families believed they were capable of. That belief, the belief that food preservation is too complicated, too risky, too old-fashioned for a modern household, is the most profitable manufactured belief in the history of American consumer culture. It generates $5 trillion in annual grocery sales. It accounts for 30 to 40% of food waste per household that someone already paid for. It is sustained by an industry that has every reason to maintain it and no reason to dismantle it. The $3 glass jar does not benefit from your dependence on the grocery store. Your great-grandmother's knowledge does not benefit from your uncertainty. The only thing that benefits is the quarterly earnings report of companies that would rather you kept paying $412 a month for the same food your family could produce for a fraction of that cost, using methods that have been proven functional for 200 years. Here is where to start. This week, go to your nearest farm stand or farmer's market and buy a box of tomatoes, whatever is cheapest and most abundant. August and September are peak season. A 25-pound box should cost between $10 and $20 depending on your region. Buy 4 quart-sized, wide-mouth mason jars if you do not already have them. $3 to $4 at any hardware store or grocery store. Buy 1 bottle of bottled lemon juice, under $2. You already have a pot. You already have a stove. That is your entire equipment list. Process them using the method I described. 45 minutes in a boiling water bath, 2 inches of water above the lids, ½ an inch of headspace, 1 tablespoon of lemon juice per quart, rims wiped clean before the lids go on. In February, when the same tomatoes cost $4 a pound at the grocery store, open one of those jars. You will understand, in a way that no video can fully convey, what your family was capable of all along. And then, drop your state in the comments. Tell me what produce is cheapest and most abundant in your area right now. Tell me if you have any outdoor space, even a balcony or a patio. Tell me if anyone in your family still remembers what they used to put up before everything became a supermarket problem. Because the next video I am going to show you is the fermentation method that pioneer families used to preserve vegetables without heat, without a pressure canner, without any equipment at all. It is older than glass jars, it is older than recorded history, and it produces a preserved food that is nutritionally superior to anything you can buy at the grocery store in a form that costs less than $1 per jar. They called it live fermentation. The FDA spent 3 decades trying to convince you it was dangerous. They failed. And the reason they failed is a story you are going to want to hear. Subscribe if you want to know what they stopped teaching.